Real estate, it's a beautiful world, it's a beautiful life, it's a beautiful career if we understand it completely. Now, what I want to do today is this. I want to go straight into agency, and how agency affects your life, how agency affects your transaction, how agency creates a beautiful relationship between you and your principal. That's the key word today. Your principal. Got it? Keep that in mind. Let's get straight to it when it comes to agency. Hey, listen, whether you're representing a buyer or seller, I want to make sure that you're covered. Now, what do I mean by being covered? What I want you to do is this. I want to make sure before you get involved in this relationship that you actually have an official relationship, that you actually have an official contract signed. Now listen, when you have a relationship with somebody, what do you want? The majority of the time you want commitment from the other party. But when it comes to real estate, it's the same thing. You want commitment from your principal. That's the key word. You want commitment from your principal, whether it's a buyer or a seller. You want them to commit to you, and guess what? They're expecting you to commit yourself to them. You got it? Hence, we have agency. Agency relationship, that's huge, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And how do we commit to our clients, and what do they expect out of us? That's simple. It's simple once you understand how it works, and I'm going to break it down simple for you. You represent a buyer, and you're showing them houses, and it's a fantastic day, and they find one they love. And you go back to your office, and you offer them a cup of coffee, and you put some creamer in there and a couple of sugars. You know what? Make it sweet and low. It tastes delicious. You say, client, my principal, let's go ahead and make this offer, right? It's a great day. Now, before you do, I want you to pump the brakes. Before you go into this rabbit hole, before you go into this venture, before you go into this real estate trip, we're going to have commitment. And the way to commit yourself to them and them to you is through agency relationship. And it's actually a document, man. It's actually a disclosure. And I want you to do that. I want you to say, listen, before we sign the residential purchase agreement, the RPA, which is used for what? Yeah, used for the buyer. Remember that? RPA, residential purchase agreement. Keyword here, purchase. Who does the purchasing? The buyer. That's the form you use for the buyer. Before attacking the RPA and filling it out for your buyer, I want you to have them sign the agency disclosure document. And that's you committing yourself to them, saying, hey, when it comes to this transaction, when it comes to us together, going down this road of purchasing this property for you, on making an offer for this house, we're in this together. Pump the brakes, let's change the channel. When you're representing a seller, same exact thing. Seller has already selected you, man. They dug your flavor, they love you. You walked in and you made your presentation. You went in there and you spoke well, you were well versed, you were well educated. You knew everything about the real estate market in that area, and they said, you're the person for me. Wow, fantastic. They're ready to commit to you. They are ready to commit to you. They said, we want to go ahead and have you, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, sign the residential listing agreement, and we're willing to sign it with you. We want to commit ourselves to each other. Not so fast, pump the brakes. I want an official commitment. Before we get to the RLA, before we sign the residential listing agreement, I want you to have them sign a commitment agreement, and that commitment agreement is the agency disclosure. We want something intact. We want a document that says, I will work for you, you will work for me, we will respect each other in the sense we're going to marry each other. Now, once we marry each other, let's go down the road of getting this house sold. Understand? So, from the buyer side, hey, before we go down this road of purchasing this property for you, before we sign this residential purchase agreement, purchase, buyer, let's sign an agency disclosure agreement. Seller side, hey, before we sign the RLA, residential listing agreement, keyword here is listing. Anytime you see the word listing, it's a seller. Before we go down the road of selling your property, of listing your property, let's commit to each other. How do we commit to each other? Let's have a document that says we're committed to each other, and that document is going to be the agency disclosure. So what the hell does that consist of? I like to consider the agency disclosure document as a ring, as a matrimonial ring. And you can say, I will marry you. We're in this together now. Now, you're not going to get on your knees and say, hey, seller, will you marry me? Hey, buyer, please marry me. Of course not. But in a sense, it's got that same concept. What concept am I talking about? Well, there's a few things. On this agreement that you're going to sign and your client is going to sign, it consists of what we call DEC. I want you to remember that for your exam, that acronym DEC, as in December, DEC. Hey, listen, for the example's sake, let's use the state of California. Now, here in the state of California, the actual disclosure for agency is called Disclosure Regarding Real Estate Agency Relationship. It's the Form AD. In the AD, we take that term as agency disclosure, right? It's Form AD, not a big deal. But on that form, we have what's called DEC, the acronym DEC. D stands for disclose, E stands for elect, last but not least, C stands for confirm. So what are we doing here? Well, the D is disclose. Let me disclose to you that you have the right to select somebody as your agent, whether it be you as a buyer or a seller. You explain to them, you make it clear and disclose to them how this form works. E, elect. And you ask them, will you please elect me? Elect me. I'll be your agent as a buyer or a seller. And last but not least, you have the C. And the C is confirm. And the way to confirm this whole relationship is you confirm by signature. Whose signature? The agent's and the principal, whether it be a buyer or seller. You with me? Nice and simple. So we use that form. That form, again, here in the state of California. It's very similar in all other states. Some states just have a verbal commitment, but most states have a contractual commitment, agency disclosure. And on this agency disclosure, again, we have what's called DEC, disclose, elect, confirm. Confirm via signature, not a big deal. Now, we got that signed. The commitment's done. The ring is on the finger. Now, what do we expect, and what do our clients, our principals expect from us? Stay with me. This is big. You just signed a document that says, I will provide you, my client, with what's called fiduciary duties. Fiduciary responsibilities towards your client. What the hell does that mean? Well, when you hear the word fiduciary, I want you to think of what we owe to our clients, what they deserve from us. In fact, you know what? I was doing some research on the National Association of Realtors website, and they have a great acronym that I'm going to use from here on out. And it's the acronym OLD CAR. OLD CAR. O stands for obedient. You have to be obedient when it comes to your principal. If your client tells you don't do an open house on Sundays, guess what? You're not doing an open house on Sundays. If your client says, oh, I don't want to see any offers less than $1 million, guess what? You got to follow their rules, their wishes. After all, it is their property. You have to be obedient when it comes to your principal. L, loyalty. That's huge. We want that in any relationship. You have to be loyal to your client, to your principal, and not the third party. You owe it to your principal, not the third party. D, disclose, disclose, disclose. You have to disclose any material defects to your client, whether it be your buyer or seller. I'll give you an example. You represent a buyer, and you're walking through the property. You go into a closet and you see major leakage in the ceiling. You saw it, but your client didn't. Your client did not notice this. And you want to hide this defect? No way, Jose. You owe it to your client, to your principal, to disclose, disclose, disclose. Put them in a good place. Don't you hide anything from them. So that's disclose. C is confidentiality between you and your principal. Your principal is confiding in you all of their information. Example, your sellers are having a troubled marriage. They're getting divorced and they're desperate to sell the property. There's no need for you to give that information out to the buyer, because the buyer will then know that they are in dire need of selling the property, and they will probably make a lower offer. You can't do that, right? So when it comes to your client, you owe it to them to keep this information confidential. The next letter is A, accounting. It's crucial. You want to make sure that your seller or your buyer is comfortable with you handling their deposits, handling anybody's deposits, handling anybody's monies, right? So the best thing for you to do is, of course, to submit all the monies, anything that's involved with accounting, to an escrow company. Somebody's going to handle it all because you shouldn't be doing it. Got it? Let's make sure that all the accounting is cared for. And the best thing to do, of course, is to hand it to somebody who does it for a living. That allows your principal to be a lot more comfortable that you're taking care of all that money. Last but not least, we have R. Now, R is reasonable care. Now, that speaks for itself. Reasonable care, when you have a seller and you have their listing and you have their house, you'll have access to their property, right? Treat it with reasonable care. That's all they ask for. Treat them with reasonable care. Treat the transaction with reasonable care. Key word here is reasonable. My entire career has been based on the word reasonable. Of course, aside from professional, but reasonable. If you allow yourself to think reasonable at all times, you'll be fine. Has to be reasonable. So when it comes to agency, what are the fiduciary duties that you owe to your principal? The acronym OLD CAR, O-L-D-C-A-R, OLD CAR. O, obedient. L, loyalty. D, disclose. C, confidentiality. A, accounting. And last but not least, R, reasonable care. There you have it. Now, pump the brakes a minute. I want to make a point here. This is a huge step in your relationship. They're expecting this from you. You owe it to them. You owe them these fiduciary duties. How do you do that when you represent both on the same deal? Now, typically, you'll have what's called single agency. Single agency is when you represent one person in the transaction. Very common. Typical deal in a real estate transaction is you're going to represent either the buyer or the seller. Nothing wrong with that. We call that single agency. Occasionally, you'll represent both. Now, some parts here in the United States of America, some parts in the nation, some states in the nation don't allow dual agency. Some states do. So how do we provide that to our clients? How do we provide fiduciary duties to both the buyer and the seller? That can be difficult, but you owe it to both of them to keep the obedience alive, to keep the loyalty alive, to keep the disclosure alive, to keep the confidentiality alive, to keep the accounting alive, to keep the reasonable care alive for both parties when it comes to dual agency. So let's get that straight. Typically, you'll have a single agency with your client every now and then. You'll have dual agency. You'll represent both sides and you earn the whole commission. Hallelujah, that's a great day for you if it's allowed in your state. So there you have it, relationships, man. We have them all over the place, with our spouses, with our kids, with professionals. We have them everywhere. But here in real estate, we have it with our clients, with our principals, not the third party. Let me emphasize that. Our relationships when it comes to agency is with our principal. And I want you to focus on your principal. And I want you to give your fiduciary duties to your principal. And I want you to love your principal. And I want you to protect your principal. Because when you do that, your principal is going to love you back and provide you with tons and tons of referrals. I guarantee it. Hey, now do yourself a favor. We talked about contracts, residential listing agreement, and residential purchase agreements. Take a look at this video right here. You're going to get tons out of it. It'll make it crystal clear. We'll see you next week.